yesterday I mentioned that maybe you could briefly go through the chapter on your own and then let me know whether there are some further questions. So if you have something you would like to clarify.
Show me the smartphone or the internet. What is the best internet thing to download to get all these words right? Because we can only understand the Roman times.
Right.
So let's say the word Sugata.
Yeah.
You want to know, then how to research? Because
you wait 1 second. You mean you are looking for a dictionary? That's what you mean? Huh. That's a bit tricky, frankly, because my recommendation would be not to use a dictionary yet, but rather to rely on those texts where there is a word-by-word explanation in the beginning when you learn Sanskrit, and build the vocabulary in that way. Because even to check a dictionary of Sanskrit, you need to know some grammar. See, I'll give you one example. The word there is Sugatan. If you go to a Sanskrit dictionary and you look for Sugatan, you will not find it. The word Sugatan comes from the stem Sugata. So it's a short A ending masculine word. It's like the word Buddha that you've repeated. So just like Buddha, 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 Buddha is Sugataha, Sugatao, Sugataha, Sugata, Sugatao, Sugataha, Sugatam, Sugatao, Sugatan. So this happens to be the second vibhakti plural of the word Sugata. So if you want to find that word, you have to look for Sugata in the dictionary. But you need to have gotten to the point where you know some grammar, even to use the dictionary. And frankly, this might sound very, how can I say, counterintuitive, but I think that using a dictionary is not the best way to learn Sanskrit. There's a few reasons for that. One reason is that the Sanskrit to English dictionaries have certain limitations, and they might confuse you, because if you take a Sanskrit to English dictionary, take any word, you'll find, let's say, 10 English meanings. Some of them might look completely unrelated. And the order in which they're given sometimes is not really the most common first. So in the beginning it can just make you lose your sense of direction. So the best way, I think, is to learn words slowly by listening to some explanation. Memorizing texts. Memorizing doesn't mean sometimes making a conscious effort to remember. That's not really the point. It means you find something and chant it many times. Slowly get the explanation many times, and you will gather some words. So for example, this whole chapter, now you don't know much Sanskrit, fine, but I think if you listen to the whole explanation and pay attention to the verses, maybe you learn 10 words. When your Sanskrit improves, maybe you learn 20 when you reread this particular chapter. Also, if you check the daily chants, the daily chants have the Skanda Dhatu and Ayatana. I think very easily you can learn the names of the 5 aggregates. This way you will build up vocabulary, you listen to the explanations, you know the words in their context, and it's a much easier, less painful way. I try to even tell this to the students in university, because the learning from a dictionary is, in my opinion, it's not a good method.
In the beginning, it would sound like a catch-22, because if you want to memorize Sugatan, Sasatan, Satamakaya, so you need to know that in these 3 words, you can place the meaning for to the 3 words. Then when you try to memorize it, it will be easier in some sense.
That's what many people think, but actually, no. The memorization should go first only the sounds, then learn the meaning, and then slowly start putting them together. Actually, usually that's the best way to memorize. In fact, if we memorize directly knowing the meaning, what happens very often is that we change some word. So it's a way to keep the memorization more precise. At some point we have to learn the meaning as much as possible, but even if you get the general meaning, it's okay. You see, if you just read the Sanskrit verse, even if you don't know much Sanskrit grammar, then you read many times the English translation, you will not know each and every word, but you will learn some words. And this is a natural way to pick up vocabulary. It might sound counterintuitive, but it works. And this is also generally, at least where I learned, this is how Sanskrit is taught in India. Like, we were taught this way. We told us many times, don't worry too much about the grammar in the beginning. You learn grammar and you learn the text together. Slowly your grammatical understanding improves. Slowly you build up vocabulary, and you will see that when you get an explanation, you will be able to follow more and more. And kind of naturally the vocabulary will build up. So this is what I would recommend you. And there are several texts where there is an explanation word by word also. I've also put some on that YouTube channel. If you check, you will find that there are some texts where there is a word by word explanation. So if you can listen to those texts and look at the word by word explanation, that's also. So in other words, I would recommend you, if you want to learn some texts with a word by word explanation, don't look for the words on your own. Look for text where that explanation is already given. This would be my recommendation. Otherwise, you will spend a lot of time looking for words in the dictionary. Even if you have an electronic dictionary, if you don't know much grammar, you'll still have a hard time. And when you get the meanings, you will not really know which one applies. Also, one reason is not to treat the language like a puzzle. This is the other. This is the drawback of much modern learning of Sanskrit and Pali, same thing. That very often people treat it like a puzzle to be solved. And in the end, they never really read that language. First of all, it becomes less enjoyable if we have to just solve it as a very complex thing. Then we lose our enjoyment and we don't get a feel for the language very easily. So that would be my suggestion, that yes, there are grammatical tools, and if you observe in that channel, and also you can find other things too, you see that there are tools to build up one's Sanskrit a little bit at a time.
YouTube because I'm not very tech-savvy.
maybe somebody can help you. It's any of the address of the channel is in the intensive Sanskrit course. There's the address, the YouTube address is there. So. Okay. Any other questions?
Also in the context of the Sanskrit, because some of the words, they have the cha, isn't it?
CH, yes.
So is it that every time it appears, the meaning is the same, or every time it appears, a different way, but different place, then the CA, the meaning is different?
Or just cha, you mean cha, not cha, but cha. Usually cha means and. Yeah. Okay, I'll make a very small point of Sanskrit grammar. If you have a list, there's two ways to say and in Sanskrit. You can put and after each and every element in the list, or you put it once. So you can say Rupam cha, Vedana cha, Samnya cha, Samskarascha, Vijnanam cha, or you just put once. Rupam Vedana, Samnya, Samskara, Vijnanam cha. There's two ways. This is just a simple point of Sanskrit grammar, but so you will find the word cha very often because it means and. So whenever there's a list, you might find cha.
How about Eva? E-V-A. Also I see that.
Eva, that's Eva.
So I saw it here several times.
Yeah, that can mean only, or it can mean itself. It can have the sense of a kind of emphasis, that thing itself, or it can mean that thing only that thing. For example, when it is Ataeva Name Parartha Chinta, just because of this, or if indeed it can, in some cases, is kind of emphasis, like Atha Mat Samadhatureva Pashyet. Mat Samadhatuhu Eva. Somebody indeed who has disposition which is similar to mine. Or Tasmat Shubham Durbalam Eva Nityam. There also you have Eva. Therefore, goodness is always weak. Durbalam Eva. You find Eva there. That emphasizes that it is just weak. Or Kadaliva Palam Vihayati Kshayamanyat Kushalam Hisarvam Eva. There are two. Just like a plant and tree, all other virtue gives fruit once and then is destroyed. There you have Sarvam Eva. Kushalam Sarvam Eva. All other, it's after word all. So there you have Eva after Sarvam, and Sarvam means all. So there it's also a kind of emphasis, meaning all without exclusion. So Eva can have slightly different but related meanings. I don't remember whether Eva appears in the daily chants for the grammar. Maybe not. Yeah, maybe in that one it doesn't appear. But there you get cha. Yeah, in the lists. You get it a few times, but you might not recognize it because of Yes, Buddham cha Dharmam cha Ganottamam cha. Yeah, that means and. Yes. Also you get it in, what are the 5 skandhas? Rupam, Vedana, Samnya, Samskara, Vijnanam, Cheti. Cheti is cha plus iti. So in that case you have the cha only once. So there you have the example of what I said. Buddham cha Dharmam cha Ganottamam cha. There you have 3 chas for 3 elements. But for the 5 skandhas, the cha appears only at the end. So if you check, you can intuitively start getting some of these points. Okay, good. But for the Bodhicitta chapter, everything is clear.
Oh, very well. I checked with the book. Yours is so simple to remember. The
Oh,
English that
thank you.
use.
Thank you. Well, if you don't have questions, either I taught very well or I taught terribly. Both possibilities. Actually, I could, one thing I could add, regarding some of yesterday's question came back to my mind. Somebody asked how to apply practically Bodhicitta. Well, one point I never understand this question very well, I have to say, because of course when we read about Bodhicitta, to me it looks very practical. Like they tell us actually what we should do, which is develop Bodhicitta. So what could be more practical than that? So sometimes I think, though, the intent of the question usually, and the person who asked the question could correct me, but very often when this question is asked, it can mean that we are busy people. How can we match this with our busy activities? Well, the answer to that I think we already found. You remember, the king, what the Buddha tells the king. If we cannot do much more, just recollect Bodhicitta throughout the day many, many times. However, I also remembered that once my teacher was Lama Tsungela, the author of the 3 Paths, was giving advice to someone who had, let's say, a kind of similar question, and he was saying then what one can do is that the moment one gets up, one should develop the bodhicitta of aspiration. During the day, one should consider all one's activities the bodhicitta of setting forth, which means we put our activities in harmony with the 6 perfections, and before sleeping one does the bodhicitta of dedication. So in that way one can practice them. And of course one should match all of these with ultimate bodhicitta, which is whichever understanding of the nature of reality one can manage. So this is also one way in which one can try to harmonize the practice of bodhicitta with one's whole day. Of course, I also think that if you have the time, and the question itself suggests that you don't, usually when one asks that question, it means I don't have much time, I want to find some way. But anyways, if you do have the time, I would recommend you to try to chant this chapter every day. Like once a day or twice a day, however many times you can. Like chant the chapter. You can chant each verse in Sanskrit and then read the English meaning in your mind. If you do that in the morning, well, I think that something will remain of that throughout the day. You can see what kind of impact chanting this chapter for 1 month can have. Does it make a difference in terms of your relationship to bodhicitta, even when you're doing other things? I think, personally, that, yeah, probably it does. So it's not too difficult. It doesn't require exceptional skills to just chant. What I mean is that we don't need to have mastered all the stages of shamatha and vipassana, or to have the ability to have stable visualizations. All of that we don't need. Just chanting the chapter is relatively accessible, and yet we can see that I think it can help us. It can be a very good support for our practice. I don't know how long it would take you, maybe half an hour, I don't know. And you can do that as a practice, meaning that one can take refuge and develop bodhicitta, the 4 immeasurables, chant the whole chapter, and then dedicate the merit. This is actually something that was Ayan Rinpoche's advice for my studies. When I asked Rinpoche, I was studying, and I was telling him how I can put it together with my practice. He would say, well, you should do the study as a practice. And the way to do it is that before you start studying a Dharma text, you do the refuge, develop bodhicitta, and then you read very respectfully, and at the end you dedicate the merit of having studied that Dharma text. So when we studied texts related to the Dharma, well, they are representations of the free jewels. We have to treat them very, very carefully, and we can do it not like a casual reading. If we develop that attitude, of course, whenever we chant or whenever we read, it's different. It is really part of our practice. And I think this can be done easily while chanting this chapter. Okay. If you have no other questions, then, oh, yes?
So it's easy to say, okay, try to love your enemy. So how to really put in practice again? I mean, to love someone that you hate so much. I mean, humans is a lot of humans are evil these days. So you can see that how you going to love some.
Okay. Well, I think in a way we discussed that implicitly when discussing the 4 immeasurables. The 4 immeasurables, like the practice of Maitri, of wishing happiness to all sentient beings, the practice does not start by having this wish for everyone. You remember? But the practice is to mentally divide sentient beings into 3 groups. The people that we like, the people that we are indifferent, and lastly, our enemies. So we start by developing Maitri towards the people that we like. Once we have mastered that, we move it towards the people that we are indifferent. And once we have mastered that, we slowly try towards the people that we dislike. So in this way, slowly, our mind becomes more flexible. And the other point, I think that many of the things that we discussed go in that direction. In fact, if we just understand impermanence, then we don't take our temporary relationship of friend and enemy too seriously. A simple thing. The people that now look like friends might have been enemies in the past, and they might become enemies in the future. The people who now are our enemies might actually have been very close to us at some point, and might again be very close to us in the future. So if we understand impermanence, we don't take this temporary sense of being close and far to different sentient beings very seriously. How do we understand impermanence? we think of death. That's kind of simple. And in fact, usually, I think we don't take too seriously the idea that we have enemies if we really understand that we are going to die. Even that, if somebody is so annoying to us, at that very moment we remember that both of us are not going to exist after a relatively short while. Immediately our annoyance is going to drop. We won't take it very seriously. So just thinking of impermanence is going to lessen our sense of having enemies. And then, of course, if we develop bodhicitta, there is no enemy. Then that's solved completely. Because bodhicitta is incompatible with the idea of having enemies. That's very simple. If we understood what is the bodhicitta of aspiration, then there is no space for enmity in the bodhicitta. So basically, in brief, if we just develop Naishkramyam bodhicitta, the wish to go out of samsara, and the wish to become Buddhas for all sentient beings, our sense that we have enemies is going to go. If we meet somebody who's annoying, then that's not an enemy, that's a very kind person, because through that we can practice patience, which is one of the very important perfections. So when we meet somebody who seems to be, without any reason, without any possible reason, that person is very nasty, like always speaking something harsh towards us, always criticizing us, we should develop, first of all, we should understand that getting upset doesn't help us in any possible way. That's first point. So we have to reflect about it before we meet the person. We should, beforehand, we should know. If we get upset, it doesn't help. It doesn't improve the situation in any possible way. We become convinced of that. The more we are convinced of that, the more when we meet the person, we don't have a kind of very immediate negative reaction. It becomes weaker. Then if we want to be real Mahayana practitioners, we should slowly reflect that this person is helping me. Thanks to this person I can practice patience. Thanks to this person, some of my unwholesome karma, which might mature as me being born in the hairs, being cut to pieces, is being purified. So this person is avoiding me a lot of suffering. This person might be an emanation of a bodhisattva who's here to avoid me lots of future trouble. So if we want to be Mahayana practitioners, when we meet a very unpleasant person, we should be somewhat happy. That should be our attitude. In fact, they say that many great masters, when they were looking for an assistant, they looked for a very annoying person. And that was a way to actually practice patience. That's the topic of chapter 6, Kshanti Paramita, the perfection of forbearance. That chapter is very helpful in terms of dealing with annoying people. But I don't know why you ask. In Penang, nobody is annoying. So I think you don't have that problem. But generally, yeah, I understand that we always might encounter somebody who looks like they're never pleased. And also sometimes we get upset by the news, etc., etc. Yeah, that's partly because the news are not they're not presented from a Buddhist perspective usually. Like we have to understand that generally the media is not like a Bodhisattva manual. It encourages to become angry at people who do something wrong. It encourages to become morally judgmental. So unfortunately, this is what we are exposed to. It's a way to attract our attention by eliciting strong emotions. So we have to be aware of that, and that's why we have to apply antidotes. We don't look at the news as a source of guidance for Bodhisattva practice. If at all we look at the news, we should know that they are written from a very different perspective, and we have to apply our own wisdom as Bodhisattva practitioners, not to be too much influenced by what we hear, and not to judge people too much. That's also a way to understand whether we are doing some progress. If we become less judgmental, I think that's a good sign. If we don't evaluate people too negatively, even when it appears that they're doing something very negative, well, if we are Bodhisattva practitioners and we are convinced that somebody has done something very, very terrible, we are convinced of that. We don't think that it's just a display that person is a Bodhisattva. We can't develop that mentality. If we are convinced that the person did something very, very negative, then what should our reaction be? It should be compassion. Like, we should understand that that person is going to suffer tremendously from that action. That the reason that person did that action ultimately is that that person has got kleshas, they have got mental afflictions. What's one of the reasons why they have mental afflictions? It's because our own practice is not effective enough to be able to teach them how to reduce their mental afflictions. So to some extent it's also our fault. So we can also think in that way. When somebody in our world sphere does something that looks so unpleasant, is not entirely disconnected from us. Not completely. So we can also think in that way, and slowly we will reduce our kind of moral high ground. This sense that those people are very bad, I'm maybe not perfect, but at least I'm a decent person. How dare they do this? When we have that kind of mentality, it's a mistake. I think it's not a sign that we are practicing very, very genuinely. So, sign that we practice genuinely is that our response to even unpleasant people is kindness. It's not something other than that. The more that becomes the case, the more we can feel that our Buddhist practice is improving. It's not too difficult to feel kindness or to feel a positive mind towards people who behave very nicely. That's not too difficult. Even very ordinary non-practitioners can do that. Then what's the difference between a practitioner and a non-practitioner? The difference should be that as Buddhist practitioners, we don't become too much overwhelmed when we see that people behave in a certain way. We have an understanding of dependent arising, so we understand that their own behavior is not entirely within their control. Their behavior comes from causes and conditions. What they can do is improve, and we are in a similar situation. Our own behavior is not perfect. We can observe that we are not able, even when we know that a certain behavior is not beneficial even to us, we cannot just make a decision and between now and the next moment completely discard it. Most people can't do that. Why? Because our behavior comes from causes and conditions. It comes from habituation. So what we can do is to slowly put our behavior in harmony with our conviction. You understand what I mean? It's like if you think of smokers. Usually they can't, even when they know that smoking is bad for them, they are already convinced that they have to give up smoking. Normally it's not like one moment. They have to struggle a little bit to go to that point. Well, actually, many of the people who have non-virtuous behavior of various types, apart from ourselves, they are in the same position. They don't do it entirely on purpose. Like, we are not entirely... Like, it's a slow process to improve one's behavior, and maybe they are trying. Like, we have also to consider this point. Even people who look like they're doing terrible things, maybe they're trying to be just a little bit less terrible. It's something we don't know. So we should actually also try to appreciate that other people are in a situation not drastically different from ours. So these are some examples, but if we apply, the more we understand dependent arising, causes and conditions, selflessness, impermanence, the more we develop renunciation and bodhicitta, etc., the less we become judgmental, the less we become upset at other people, and the more our response is a kind response. But if we can't manage that, the first thing to do, like if there is somebody and we still cannot manage to avoid getting angry at the person, the first thing to do is to try to limit how often we meet that person. Is a very simple thing. Sometimes we can't avoid it, but at least we should limit it. It's the same thing as why is there the necessity to do retreat? Because the first thing is to remove the object that causes our mental afflictions. Then when our mind becomes stronger, even when that object is there, our afflictions will not be so strong. But normally in the beginning, what happens is that we don't have sufficient training to avoid that from happening. So this is, it's like for any, because it's an addiction. In the end, our response is due to our addiction. So it's the same thing for people who are addicted to something. First, they remove that thing. Then, when they are really over the addiction, they can start being around that object of addiction without being overwhelmed to the point of really once again falling into the addiction. And maybe at one point, let's take the example of alcohol. Then maybe at that point, that same person who used to be an alcoholic can manage to even drink a little bit without falling into intoxication and drinking too much. But in the beginning, they have to just remove themselves from the object of addiction, and even after some time, they have to keep a distance and avoid situations which will encourage that. Now, that's an example of an object of desire. Anger is an example of an object of aversion. So in the beginning, try to avoid. and then when the person is not there, apply all the reasonings which make it clear that getting angry is not worth it. But okay, these are some examples. For that, for anger specifically, chapter 6 is the extensive explanation. Okay, any other questions?
Just now you encourage us to do chanting, is it?
Yes.
And then if I understand correctly, chanting also got married, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain more that why chanting gets married? So that because you say that after chanting we should do dedication, is it?
Yeah.
So can you explain more detail a bit that why chanting gets married?
Okay. Well, first of all, merit depends from intention. So you start chanting by first developing the intention of Bodhicitta with the purpose of learning the Buddha's teachings, and that's a very meritorious activity in itself. Plus, you're repeating the words of some great master who in turn has a genuine understanding of a Buddha's teaching, so that itself carries some kind of blessing. If you do in Sanskrit, well, maybe it's not a huge difference, but it's a connection to the language used by all the Buddhas. Usually everything which is connected to the three jewels, when we make positive connection to that, it produces merit. The three jewels are a field of merit. For all these reasons. Of course, it also depends how you do the chanting. If we keep a good attention and we try to keep a sincere intention while we chant, and slowly we can reflect on the meaning. In this case, this becomes a reflection on Bodhicitta. It helps us developing Bodhicitta, and this chapter itself tells us how meritorious that is. And for all these reasons. Okay? Any other questions? Yes.
Dr. Mattia, you mentioned that there are karmas that we have to experience, and at the same time there are karmas where we may have sufficient levels to suppress them.
Yeah.
So what are the actions that cause this to be karmas?
Well, that's a kind of question that one should ask to a Buddha.
Potential one also like that.
I think I don't know. It's yeah, it's quite hard to know, because we don't know also the extent to which our bodhicitta is genuine, and how powerful this actual. As I was saying, the best thing is to assume that it is not, so that it keeps improving. And from that perspective, we should always think that we still have lots of karma to purify, and therefore think that our bodhicitta is not sufficient to do that, and so we develop thankfulness when we meet somebody who is annoying and helps us purifying the karma. I do not know whether there is a specific classification of which karmas are overcome. In theory, it says even very, very great karmas can be overcome by bodhicitta. When is bodhicitta genuine? According to some teachings, when one has no grasping whatsoever at one's own benefit. But you see, we could keep on asking, we can keep on doubting our own situation if we want, because we can say, okay, when is it that one has no more grasping at his own benefit? And then we can give another reply, and then it goes on and on. But ultimately, it's something, at some point, we should just know. Like, if we eat something, we eat an apple. How do you know that you've eaten an apple? So we can always, yes, there is always an element of uncertainty and we can analyze, but at some level, on the other hand, we know. If we try to develop bodhicitta, we know whether we tried or not. To some extent, we know the difference between saying words without any connection to their meaning or having done it with as much as a sincere intention that we can master. So, while appreciating this quality of suppressing the efficacy of past negative karma, at the same time we can do purification, separate purification practices, repentance, etc., etc. It's not contradictory. And take the apparently unpleasant situation that happened to us as also an occasion to purify some negative karma and to practice patience. Okay, everything else clear? That's good. We have actually gone through the whole chapter. We didn't have to rush. I've repeated things a few times, partly because this chapter is very important. The Bodhicharyavatara is very important as a whole, but this chapter is the entrance in the Mahayana. So, if I made some mistake, I apologize. If something wasn't clear, I apologize. Not just to you, but to my teacher, the three jewels. It was not my intention. But I hope I haven't made too many mistakes. And I hope somehow it was comprehensible and you might feel encouraged to keep on learning the Bodhicharyavatara. I think it's really worth it personally. I found this text to be very, very helpful, and it's not just me. More importantly, if you observe, many of the great Buddhist masters have really placed a great emphasis on the Bodhicharyavatara. It's a very extraordinary text. And we have good timing, because today happens to be Buddha Shakyamuni Day. It's new moon. So it's quite good that we complete this text today. So now we are completed and we can say the dedication of merit for today and in a way for the whole sessions that we have had on the Bodhicharyavatara. So we can say the dedication of merit 3 times together. Anena punyena tu sarvadashitam Avakya nirjitya chadosha vidvisha Jararuja mrityu mahurmi sankula Samuddarayam bhavasagaras jagat Anena punyena tu sarvadashitam Avakya nirjitya chadosha vidvisha Jararuja mrityu mahurmi sankula Samuddarayam bhavasagaras jagat Anena punyena tu sarvadashitam Avakya nirjitya chadosha vidvisha Jararuja mrityu mahurmi sankula Samuddarayam bhavasagaras jagat